5 missing letters, 1 diplomat dead, and a trail that leads to Vienna. Welcome to Agent Ash. I am your host, Hallo. Take a second to drop a comment. Where are you tuning in from tonight? I always look forward to hearing from you. Let's begin. It began, as such things often do, with a letter. Not the type one expects to change lives or alter the course of justice. No, it was handwritten, faintly perfumed, sealed in a violet envelope, and posted from a discreet district of Vienna. The handwriting was elegant, continental, and clearly the product of an educated hand. But there was a tremor in the ink, a hesitation in the loops of the capital letters, as though the writer feared every word she committed to paper. It arrived not at Poirot's own lodgings, but at the office of his publisher in London, redirected by a sharp-eyed secretary who recognized the name scrawled in florid script across the front. Monsieur Hercule Poirot, urgent, strictly personal. Those words were underlined twice. A woman's hand, no doubt, and one in distress. Captain Hastings returned from Argentina for what he had optimistically described as a quiet summer in England, had been visiting Poirot that very afternoon when the letter was opened. I remember the moment clearly. The Belgian detective, neat and composed even in the heat of June, sat in his favourite armchair, freshly pressed grey suit immaculate, shoes gleaming. His moustache, majestic and symmetrical as always, twitched ever so slightly as he broke the seal. Hastings leaned forward, the afternoon tea between them momentarily forgotten. As Poirot read, a subtle shift came over his face. His brows knit, then relaxed. His expression was one of mild curiosity, followed quickly by something rarer, concern. "Well, Poirot?" Hastings asked. "Bad news?" Poirot folded the letter carefully, then placed it on the small table beside his untouched cup. "My friend," he said slowly, "do you recall the name Amelia Hartfeld?" Hastings frowned. "Sounds vaguely familiar. Austrian, perhaps?" Poirot nodded. "An Englishwoman who married into Austrian nobility just before the Great War. Lady Amelia von Hartfeld, a woman of exceptional grace and considerable discretion. I encountered her years ago during a rather delicate matter involving diplomatic cables and a forged marriage certificate." "Ah," said Hastings, visibly intrigued. "One of your old cases?" "Let us say, one of my quieter triumphs," Poirot said modestly, "and one I thought long behind me." He picked up the letter again. "She writes now with urgency. She is in Vienna once more, at the family estate of her late husband, Baron Anton von Hartfeld. She claims there is a matter of grave danger, something concerning a collection of documents her husband kept locked away for decades. She refers to them only as the Vienna letters." "Espionage?" Hastings guessed. Poirot tilted his head. "Possibly, but she does not say. Only that someone has broken into the archives beneath the house, and shortly afterward, her eldest son, Leopold, was found dead." "Good heavens! Murder?" "She does not say it outright, but her meaning is clear. The Austrian police have ruled it a suicide. Pills, locked door, no sign of struggle. But Amelia, she writes, he would never have taken his own life. Never." Poirot stood and smoothed the front of his waistcoat. "There is more," he added. "She believes she is being watched, that someone is going through her papers. She writes that she is afraid to speak openly, and that she trusts no one but me." Hastings straightened. "Well, if that's not a call to arms, Poirot." Poirot raised a hand. "And yet, my friend, it is not so simple. The estate of the von Hartfelds is not a happy place. After the Baron's death, the family splintered. There were bitter legal disputes, whispered scandals, and, if I recall, a certain daughter disowned for marrying beneath her station. The house is full of ghosts, Hastings, and secrets." He paused. "And you know how I feel about secrets." A day later, they arrived in Vienna by train. Poirot detested flying, a most barbaric invention that disturbs the liver and the symmetry of the soul. So they had opted for the more dignified route. The journey gave Hastings ample time to brush up on the Hartfeld family, whose name had once been prominent in Austrian diplomatic circles, before their gradual decline following the war. The von Hartfeld estate, Schloss Welden, was a vast and brooding structure perched on the edge of the Vienna woods. Ivy-covered turrets, leaded glass windows, and carved stone lions gave it an air of forgotten nobility. The gravel drive crunched beneath the wheels of their motor car as they approached. The butler, a gaunt man named Weber, met them at the door with a bow that was too deep to be sincere. Lady Amelia greeted them in the blue salon. She had aged, of course, but she retained her poise. Her white hair was elegantly pinned, her silk blouse immaculate, and her hands trembled only slightly as she extended them to Poirot. "You came," she whispered, voice cracking. "I wasn't sure you would." Poirot bowed, deeply and respectfully. "But of course, madame, I never forget a debt." She offered a tight, grateful smile and led them to a pair of deep armchairs by the fireplace, where tea had been laid out with surgical precision. "I don't have long," she said softly, eyes flicking toward the closed door. "They listen, you know. Someone is always listening." Poirot gave a small, reassuring nod. "Tell me everything, Lady Hartfeld, from the beginning." She hesitated, then reached into her sleeve and produced a folded sheet of paper. Yellowed with age, the writing was faded, but still legible. Poirot accepted it with care. "It's one of them," she whispered. "One of the Vienna letters." Hastings leaned in. "But what are they?" Lady Amelia's eyes glistened with something between fear and defiance. "They are letters written by my husband during the final days of the war," she said. "Not to family, not to friends. They were meant for someone in London. Someone powerful. He never sent them, but he kept them. 54 in total. I found the key to the archives in his study after his death." Poirot unfolded the letter slowly, scanning the contents with deepening interest. "He wrote of betrayals," Emilia said, "of men who wore the face of honor, but were selling secrets to both sides. He names names, Monsieur Poirot, names that were never meant to see the light of day." "And your son?" Poirot asked gently. "Leopold. Did he know?" "He was the one who insisted I tell no one. He feared what the letters might mean. But last week, he went to the archives. The next morning, he was dead." There was silence in the room. Poirot folded the letter and placed it on the tea tray. "This is not merely a question of family tragedy," he said quietly. "This is a question of who knew Leopold had read the letters, and who stood to lose if their contents became known." Lady Amelia looked at him, eyes pleading. "Can you find the truth, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot stood. "I do not yet know, madame," he said with a small, grave smile. "But I shall begin, and when Poirot begins, he always finishes." And so the affair of the Vienna letters was begun, with tea and tragedy, and a letter written in fear. What lay ahead would test even Poirot's legendary mind, for this was no ordinary murder, but one buried beneath decades of silence, war, and betrayal. The wind whispered through the tall windows of Schloss Welden as Poirot and Hastings were led up the sweeping staircase by the butler, Weber. The air in the old estate felt charged, not merely from the chill of early evening settling into the stone walls, but with a tension that clung to every corridor, every locked door, every family portrait. Hastings glanced around, taking in the heavy tapestries, the ancient oil paintings, the marble busts staring blankly across the vast halls. Yet it was Poirot who noticed the detail others would miss: the fresh scuff marks on the banister, the slight tilt of a Persian runner rug near a side passage, the faint smell of tobacco smoke lingering beneath the lavender polish. Weber paused before a set of double doors and gestured solemnly. "The family has gathered in the winter room, monsieur. Lady Amelia requested you meet them at once." Poirot gave a curt nod, adjusting the cuffs of his immaculate suit. "Merci, Monsieur Weber. That will be all for now." Inside the room, a fire burned low in a grand hearth, casting flickering shadows on the faces of those present. Poirot's eyes swept the room methodically. 7 individuals, 7 sets of eyes that turned as one to study the man who had come, uninvited by them, but summoned by Lady Amelia. She sat to one side, composed but pale. At her right was a tall, unsmiling woman in her early 40s with an imperious chin and sharp grey eyes. Undoubtedly the daughter Amelia had mentioned. She wore a steel blue dress and held a crystal glass that caught the firelight. Poirot identified her immediately from his earlier research. Elizabeth von Hartfeld, the Baron's eldest daughter. She had once been engaged to an English diplomat, but had instead married a Viennese banker who had since vanished under ignoble circumstances. Her stare was level and calculating. Next to her lounged a younger man in his 30s, dark-haired and too handsome by half. He wore a deep green jacket and spoke to no one. Poirot noted the flick of his fingers across the glass stem, restless, rhythmic. Stefan von Hartfeld, the second son, a minor painter, a sometime poet, and by most accounts a failure who lived off the diminishing family fortune. To his left was a woman Poirot could not immediately place, slight, fair-haired, with the air of someone who had been dragged here reluctantly. She clutched a notebook and did not meet his eye. Beside her sat a man of about 50, tall and straight-backed, with the unmistakable bearing of military experience. His jaw was tight, his tie immaculate. Colonel Godfrey Ames, Hastings would later whisper, an Englishman and former liaison to the Hartfeld estate, now a frequent visitor and close to Amelia, though not family. A woman in widow's black sat at the far end, her veil lifted just enough to reveal a stern, angular face. She was striking, if cold. Poirot judged her to be in her late 30s. Her posture was rigid, her gloved hands folded in her lap. Last, barely visible behind the others, was a girl of perhaps 19 or 20, seated on a low stool near the hearth. Her eyes were red, as if from recent weeping, and her auburn curls were unkempt. She wore a grey cardigan that hung loose at the shoulders. She looked at Poirot with something close to suspicion, perhaps fear. "Messieurs, mesdames," Poirot said, stepping forward, his voice clear but unobtrusive. "Allow me to introduce myself. I am Hercule Poirot. I come at the request of Lady Amelia to inquire into the recent, how shall I put it, most regrettable event concerning your brother, Leopold." There was a flicker, too quick to be pinned down, across the face of Elizabeth. Stefan raised a brow. The girl by the fire flinched. Lady Amelia cleared her throat. "I've asked Monsieur Poirot to look into the matter. I know what the authorities have said, but I refuse to accept their conclusion. My son did not take his own life, and if none of you can explain what truly happened, then Monsieur Poirot shall." A silence followed. Poirot waited, letting it hang. It was not a comfortable silence. It was surgical. Poirot had always known how to make silence do his work for him. "Suicide is a private affair," said Elizabeth. Finally, her voice cool and precise. "I'm not certain what you hope to achieve here, monsieur." "I hope to achieve clarity, mademoiselle," Poirot replied softly, "and perhaps justice." Stefan chuckled bitterly. "Justice? In this house? You're 30 years too late." "I find," Poirot said, stepping closer, "that justice is never too late. Only, sometimes, inconvenient." Colonel Ames rose from his chair. "If I may, I do think we'd all appreciate some clarity, monsieur. If you're to be poking into this tragedy, perhaps it's best we make our introductions properly." He turned to Poirot and extended a hand. "Colonel Godfrey Ames, I served alongside the late Baron during the final year of the war. He and I remained close until his death, and I've done what I can to assist Lady Amelia since." Poirot inclined his head politely. "A soldier and a loyal friend, an invaluable combination." The veiled woman spoke next, voice low but commanding. "Camilla von Hartfeld, widow of Leopold. We were married 10 years, and yes, I was here when it happened. I discovered him." Hastings stirred slightly beside Poirot, but said nothing. Poirot merely nodded, his face unreadable. "Elizabeth," said the elder daughter, without waiting for a prompt. "Sister to the deceased. This is my brother Stefan, my niece Clara," she added, gesturing toward the girl by the fire, "and my cousin's daughter, Annalise." The fair-haired girl gave a timid nod, still avoiding eye contact. "And I," added Stefan, with a sardonic lift of his brow, "am the disappointment of the family. Not yet dead, but give it time." Lady Amelia said nothing. She stared into the fire, her lips pressed thin. Poirot clapped his hands softly, as if concluding a small concert. "Bon. And now that we are all acquainted, I wonder if I might ask a few simple questions." No one objected. "Who last saw Monsieur Leopold alive?" There was a pause. "I did," said Camilla. "It was late, around 10. He said he was going to the study to work. I brought him a cup of tea. He was agitated." "Agitated in what way, madame?" "He had been to the archives that morning. Spoke of something he found. He wouldn't tell me what. Only that it was dangerous. I begged him to leave it alone. He said, 'It's too late for that now.'" Poirot nodded gravely. "And you, Mademoiselle Clara?" he said, turning suddenly toward the girl. "Did you speak to your father that evening?" She looked up, startled. I saw him through the window. He was pacing, muttering to himself. I didn't go in. I wish I had." Poirot tilted his head. "What did you hear him say?" She swallowed. "Just one thing. He said, 'I should have burned them.'" Poirot blinked once, very slowly. "I see. And these letters? They are now missing?" "Yes," said Lady Amelia quietly. "The day after his death, the drawer where he kept them was empty, locked. No sign of forced entry." "Curious," murmured Poirot. "Curious indeed." He folded his arms and stepped back slightly, surveying the assembled faces. They were masks, every one of them, some angry, some blank, others bristling with something carefully disguised as grief. Poirot had seen it before, in drawing rooms, in train compartments, in mountain lodges. A group of people bound by blood or money, caught in the gravity of a single death, each with a reason to lie, each with something to protect, but none of them, none, could hide what he needed most. A single contradiction, a crack in the order, a glimpse of the truth buried beneath the manners and the mourning, and he would find it. Of that, Poirot was certain. That night, Poirot declined supper. He made his apologies with polite murmurs and vanished into the narrow upstairs corridor, leaving Hastings to dine alone with the family, a task the captain later described as akin to picnicking in a minefield. Tensions had simmered just below civility throughout the meal. Elizabeth dominated conversation with a brittle smile and curt opinions. Stefan drank too quickly and said too little. Camilla wore her widow's mask of indifference like armor, and young Clara barely touched her food. Only Colonel Ames, with his clipped courtesy, made an effort to maintain a sense of order, though even he seemed uneasy under the weight of so many unsaid things. Poirot, meanwhile, paced slowly along the east wing hallway, pausing now and again to examine portraits, windows, floorboards. A crack here, a misaligned doorframe there. Nothing escaped his attention. He took note of the draught near the library arch, the echoing of his own footsteps between the corridor and the servants' stairwell. Every sound, every shadow told him something. Shortly before 10, Poirot requested to be taken to the study. Leopold's last known location. Weber the butler guided him with silent reluctance. He seemed particularly hesitant as they approached the heavy oak door, and Poirot, ever the observer of the human condition, noted the faint twitch of his left eye and the nervous smoothing of his cuffs. "You were the one who found the body, no?" Poirot asked gently as Weber turned the key. "I was, sir," he murmured, opening the door but making no move to enter. "You may go. I will not disturb anything." "Merci." Left alone, Poirot stepped into the room. It smelled faintly of dust, wood polish, and something metallic, perhaps ink or the residue of old typewriter ribbons. A single desk lamp cast a pool of amber light across the wide desk, illuminating scattered papers, a blotter, a leather-bound notebook, and a single porcelain teacup, now cold, a faint ring staining the saucer. Poirot approached the desk slowly. It was just as Camilla had described it, as though Leopold had left in the middle of writing something and never returned. But there were subtleties. The ashtray had a single, stubbed-out cigarette, yet Leopold had not been known to smoke in recent years. The glass inkwell bore traces of having been used, yet no fresh writing could be found among the visible papers. The leather blotter had been recently flipped, the cleaner side now facing up. And then there was the chair. Poirot stood before it and tilted his head. It had been pushed in, too far in fact. For a man intending to work, it was not in a natural position. Someone, Poirot reasoned, had tidied this space. Not out of grief, but with a purpose. He crouched carefully and examined the underside of the desk. There, faint but undeniable, were scratch marks. Marks that suggested the drawer had been forced open in the past week, perhaps twice. The lock had been relatched, but showed signs of tampering. Not crude, but not expert either. Someone had known what they were looking for, but had lacked finesse. Poirot rose and moved to the bookshelf along the wall. It was grand, old, and intricately carved. Several volumes had been removed and returned recently. Dust trails betrayed the motion. One section in particular seemed more disturbed than the rest. Poirot ran a finger along the titles. Volume 7 of the Austro-Hungarian Diplomatic Letters, 1915 to 1918, was slightly misaligned. He eased it forward. Nothing happened. Then he tried the one beside it, Volume 8. As he tugged, he heard a soft click behind the shelf. He stepped back. A narrow panel had shifted open. Within, the space was empty. Poirot's brows rose slightly. "Ah," he whispered. "So, it was here." The Vienna letters, once hidden, now missing. Poirot stepped away slowly, letting the panel shut. He left the study undisturbed and returned to his room without another word to the household. Hastings was waiting for him, seated in a striped armchair by the fire, one hand nursing a small brandy, his jacket unbuttoned. "Well?" Hastings asked. "Learn anything?" Poirot removed his gloves and placed them neatly on the nightstand. He sighed. "Only what I already suspected, mon ami, that the death of Monsieur Leopold is not what it seems, and that someone in this house, someone clever but not clever enough, has taken great pains to alter the scene of his final hours." Hastings leaned forward. "You mean the letters were stolen?" "Mais oui, taken from their hiding place, by someone who knew they existed, knew where to find them, and knew that once they were gone, there could be no evidence of what Leopold discovered." Hastings frowned. "But who? Surely Amelia herself wouldn't—" "No," Poirot said. "She is afraid, yes, but not deceptive. Besides, she sent for me. That alone absolves her of the act. No, the thief is among the others. They have all been here the past fortnight. One of them knew what the letters contained, or feared it." "Could it be the widow? Camilla?" Poirot's face was unreadable. "She is grieving, yes, but her grief is of a curious sort. It is not loss alone that troubles her. It is something else. Fear, perhaps. Shame. Guilt. We shall see. Hastings considered. What about the niece, Clara? She's very quiet. Too quiet, murmured Poirot. And that is always interesting. Before Hastings could reply, there was a soft knock on the door. Poirot opened it to find Clara standing there, her cardigan pulled tight around her, her eyes wide and uncertain. I didn't know who else to come to, she said. May I speak with you? Just for a moment. Of course, mademoiselle, Poirot said gently, ushering her inside. Hastings rose, offering her the seat by the fire. She took it hesitantly, glancing between them. I don't know what's going on, she said, but I think I saw something the night my father died. Poirot leaned forward. Take your time. Tell me everything. She nodded, eyes welling. It was late. I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs, through the back passage near the conservatory. I didn't want anyone to see me. I was just going to the kitchen, but when I passed the library, I saw light under the door. She paused. Poirot waited. I peeked through the crack. Someone was inside. Not my father. Someone else. A man. Could you see who? She shook her head. Number. Just the back of him. He had a torch. He was at the bookcase. I didn't know what he was doing. I didn't want to get caught watching, so I ran back upstairs. Then, the next morning, he was gone. Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. Did anyone else know you saw this? No, Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Not until now. Poirot rose, came to stand by the fire. Mademoiselle, he said softly, what you have told me is important, but I must ask, do you trust everyone in this house? Clara hesitated. Then, no, I don't. Poirot nodded slowly. That, at least, is wise. She rose, wiping her eyes. Will you find out who killed him? Poirot touched his fingers together. I will do more than that, mademoiselle. I will understand why. And in understanding the motive, I will uncover the truth. As the girl left the room, Poirot turned to Hastings. You see, my friend, even in the dark, there is always a witness. Always. And then he added, almost to himself, someone feared what was in those letters, but more than that, someone feared what Leopold might do with them. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the ivy against the walls of Schloss Welden. Inside, Poirot began the slow, exacting work of thought, memory, and deduction, for the game had begun in earnest. Morning came heavy and grey over Schloss Welden, casting a dull light through the high arched windows of the breakfast room. The family gathered late, bleary-eyed and cool in their courtesies. Conversation was sparse, as though each person present sensed the others had reasons to remain guarded. Camilla sipped her coffee in silence, eyes trained on nothing in particular. Elizabeth unfolded the morning paper with a rustle that seemed louder than it needed to be. Stefan arrived last, yawning theatrically, his cravat undone and his hair still damp from the bath. Poirot appeared precisely at 9, as if on cue, not a wrinkle on his suit, not a hair out of place. He greeted each person with a mild nod, exchanged brief pleasantries with Lady Amelia, and then turned to Weber, who hovered near the tea-cart. Monsieur Weber, would you be so kind as to fetch Colonel Ames for a moment? I believe he is walking the grounds. Weber blinked, but nodded, and departed with a bow. The room grew tense. Poirot made no effort to disguise that this was no casual summons. I find, Poirot said gently, that morning is the best time for questions. The night clears the mind, yes? One sees things with a new clarity. Camilla's fork paused mid-air. Are we being interrogated, Monsieur Poirot? Elizabeth asked with a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. Interrogation? Poirot echoed. No, no, a word far too harsh. Let us call it A conversation among those who all wish for the same thing, truth. He turned to Clara, who sat beside her mother, fidgeting with the corner of her napkin. "You said last night, Mademoiselle Clara, that you saw someone in the study." Clara flushed, clearly wishing she hadn't spoken. "I only saw his back," she said quickly, "and it was dark." "Of course, and you were wise to come forward. Sometimes it is a single glimpse, a flicker of light beneath a door, that begins the unravelling of a great knot." Stefan snorted. "So we're unravelling knots now?" "Yes," Poirot said, fixing him with a look that was not unkind. "And sometimes the knots are not made of rope, but of fear, of guilt, of silence." Colonel Ames entered then, shaking off the damp from his coat. "You asked for me, Poirot?" "Oui. Merci, Colonel. If you will indulge me a moment more of your time." Poirot moved to the head of the table, folding his hands. "There is something I must know, something I ask each of you to consider carefully. Who, among you, knew of the existence of the Vienna letters before Leopold's death?" No one spoke. Poirot let the silence stretch just long enough. "Madame Camilla?" he prompted softly. Her eyes narrowed. "He mentioned old documents once. He said he'd found something he should have burned, but I didn't know what they were. And you, Colonel Ames?" The man stiffened. "He said nothing to me directly, but I recall the Baron once spoke of things he could not commit to public record. Letters, yes. Nothing I would have thought important now." Poirot turned to Elizabeth. "Mademoiselle?" "I had no interest in my father's secrets," she said coldly. "If they were treacherous, better they stayed hidden. If they were dull, better forgotten." "And yet," Poirot said, quietly, "your brother seemed to think otherwise." Elizabeth looked away. Poirot moved on. "Monsieur Stefan?" The younger man laughed softly. "Me? If I'd known there was something worth stealing, I wouldn't be living in a flat above a café in Neubourg." Poirot nodded slowly, then turned once again to Clara. She bit her lip. I didn't know what they were called, but father used to go down to the archives late at night. Sometimes I'd hear him reading aloud, names, dates. It frightened me. He said he was trying to understand something before it was too late." Poirot tilted his head. "And Annalisa?" The fair-haired girl, who had remained silent thus far, looked startled to be addressed. "I don't live here," she said quickly. "I only arrived 3 days before it happened. Yet you are part of the family." "I am only distantly related," she murmured. "My mother was a cousin. I came to help Lady Amelia with the household records." Poirot gave her a gentle smile. "And you are most helpful, I am sure." He straightened. "You see, mes amis, one must ask, who would benefit from the letters being destroyed? Who might fear what they contained? And who had the opportunity to take them?" No one answered. He continued, more softly now. "I have examined the study. The drawer that once held the letters shows signs of tampering. It was relocked to appear undisturbed. That speaks of calculation, not panic. This was not the act of someone impulsive. It was the work of someone who knew exactly what they needed to take and what to leave behind." Poirot turned and walked toward the windows, pausing there, looking out over the fog-shrouded lawn. "There is something more. The day before Leopold's death, he received a telephone call, placed from Vienna proper. The number has been disconnected since, but the timing is curious." Camilla spoke up then, her voice tighter than before. "He seemed shaken afterward. I asked who had called. He didn't answer. Just said, 'It's worse than I thought.' That," Poirot said, turning back to face them, "is what I must now discover. What did Leopold learn that made him say that? What secret was too dangerous to live with?" Hastings, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally leaned forward. "You suspect one of them took the letters, Poirot?" "I do not suspect. Poirot said calmly. I observe. I listen, and I see. He paused. There is a pattern beginning to form, mon ami, a shape in the smoke, but the details, they remain elusive. He tapped his temple lightly. Yet the little grey cells, they are beginning to stir. Just then, Weber returned with a tray of letters and placed them before Lady Amelia. Morning post, madam. She thanked him absently and began sorting through the envelopes. Poirot watched closely. She paused at one, a small square envelope with no return address. The handwriting blocky and unfamiliar. Amelia opened it and gasped. Poirot was at her side instantly. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No salutation, no signature. Only 4 words, scrawled in dark pencil. Burn them, or suffer. The room was suddenly very still. Poirot took the paper, examined the fibres, the angle of pressure. Handwritten, untraceable. The envelope had been posted within the city yesterday morning. He looked around the room. Now, he said softly, the danger is no longer hypothetical. Someone is watching, and someone is afraid. Camilla had gone pale. Clara clutched her mother's hand tightly. Stefan raised both brows, but said nothing. Elizabeth's lips compressed into a narrow line. And Colonel Ames? He seemed less surprised than he ought to be. Poirot turned to Amelia, then folded the note carefully and slipped it into his inner pocket. We will not burn anything, madame, he said, but we will find the one who sent this. He turned to face the others, his voice quiet but firm. And I believe the time has come to revisit the archives. The day had begun with silence, but now the house was awake, with unease, with suspicion, with fear. Poirot smiled faintly. Now, he thought, they will begin to move, and when people move, they make mistakes. They descended to the archives as the sky outside darkened once more, clouds thickening in low, oppressive layers. Poirot walked ahead, Weber leading him with a candelabrum in hand, his gait precise, his silence heavier than before. Hastings followed close behind, careful not to scuff the old stone steps or brush against the dusty walls lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow them. The air grew colder as they reached the bottom floor, where the corridor narrowed into a vault-like chamber carved into the old foundations of Schloss Welden. The archive door was heavy oak, bolted with iron hinges, and fitted with a brass lock, far newer than the rest of the estate. Weber produced a key, his fingers trembling slightly as he passed it to Poirot. You were entrusted with the only key? Poirot asked, testing the lock's mechanism. Since the Baron's death, yes, sir, Weber replied stiffly. He gave it to me directly before he passed, but Lady Amelia knew of it too. And Leopold? Poirot's fingers paused, just before turning the key. He demanded access 3 weeks ago. I refused at first. He insisted. Eventually, Lady Amelia overruled me. Poirot nodded and turned the key. The door gave with a reluctant groan, revealing a vast, vaulted room, lined with wooden shelves, stacked with leather-bound volumes, old dispatch boxes, metal filing drawers, and long rows of archival folders, marked in the Baron's precise hand. They stepped inside. The air was musty, thick with the weight of years. Poirot inhaled slowly, moving like a man in a sacred place. Impressive, Hastings murmured, glancing around. More than that, Poirot said, softly. This room is memory made physical, and memory, mon ami, is a dangerous thing when certain truths have been locked away too long. He moved toward the back wall, where a large metal filing cabinet stood apart from the rest. Its surface bore faint scratches, recent ones, Poirot noted, and the lock had been broken and refitted with a makeshift clasp. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Unprofessional, he muttered. He opened the top drawer carefully. Empty. The second. Empty. In the third, tucked beneath a pile of seemingly irrelevant estate correspondence, Poirot found a single envelope, ivory and weather-worn. He drew it out and held it beneath the candlelight. On the front, "To be opened only if I am found dead." Hastings sucked in a breath. "Good Lord, mon Dieu," Poirot whispered. He broke the seal and withdrew a sheet of thick paper. The handwriting was Leopold's, slanted, rushed, as though written under strain. "To whomever finds this, if I am dead, do not accept the explanation they give you. I have uncovered names, men who once wore uniforms of honor, but acted only for themselves. I have seen what my father tried to shield us from. The letters. They are damning. They speak of betrayal, yes, but not only of nations, of family. Someone close to us was involved. I fear what will happen now. I cannot trust anyone. I fear I have gone too far." L.V.H. Poirot read the letter twice, slowly, then folded it and placed it into his inner pocket beside the threatening note sent to Lady Amelia. "It was not merely a political matter," he murmured. "This touches blood." He turned to Hastings. "We must return upstairs. Now." As they made their way back through the corridor, Poirot was silent, his steps urgent, his brows deeply furrowed in thought. Hastings knew better than to interrupt him. When they returned to the main floor, the household had gathered in the music room. Lady Amelia, Clara, Camilla, Elizabeth, Stefan, and Annalisa, who sat near the window nervously twisting the hem of her sleeve. Colonel Ames stood apart, arms folded, a storm in his expression. Poirot entered quietly, holding the letter. "I have found a message from Leopold," he announced. "It was hidden in the archives. He feared for his life." Gasps filled the room. Camilla covered her mouth. Clara looked visibly shaken. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. "What are you suggesting?" she said, voice sharp. Poirot met her gaze. "I suggest that the suicide ruling was not merely premature, it was entirely incorrect." He stepped forward. Monsieur Leopold knew something he should not have known. He had discovered the identity of someone implicated in his father's secret letters, someone within this family, this household, who would have done anything to prevent those letters from being read. Stefan stood abruptly. "This is madness. You're accusing us of murder?" Poirot raised a hand. "Non, I accuse no one, yet. But I will." He turned to Colonel Ames. "You knew the Baron well. You served with him." "I did." "Did he ever confide in you the names of those who had turned traitor during the war?" Ames stiffened. "He alluded to many things. But no, he never gave names. He said it was not safe, not even for me." Poirot's gaze lingered. "Yet you remained close to the family." "I owed Anton my life, and I promised to protect his legacy." Poirot looked at Amelia. "Did your husband ever name those he feared?" She shook her head. "He burned many of his old letters in his final months. But the Vienna letters, he kept them. He believed someday they might clear the record, but perhaps he feared they would only cause pain." Clara's voice trembled. "You think one of us killed my father?" Poirot walked to her gently. "I think your father was killed by someone who feared exposure. Whether that fear was political, personal, or familial, I do not yet know." Camilla spoke then, very softly. "There is something you should know. The night before he died, Leopold received a parcel. It came late, after dinner. I didn't see what was inside. But afterward, he went directly to the study and locked the door. Did he mention the sender? Number he just said, 'It's all connected.' And then he changed, became guarded, frightened." Poirot turned back to Elizabeth. "You do not seem surprised." She stared at him coldly. "Because I've seen what paranoia did to my father. Now I see it in my brother. You want villains in this room, Monsieur Poirot. Perhaps you brought them with you." There was a beat of silence. Poirot moved to the fireplace, studying the framed portrait of Baron Anton von Hartfeld, above the mantel. "He feared betrayal," Poirot said. "He documented it. He left a trail, and now his son has followed him into the grave." He turned back. "I have one final question, for all of you. Were any of you aware that 2 weeks ago a visitor came to Schloss Welden and met secretly with Leopold?" Gasps again. Clara turned to her mother. "No," Camilla whispered. Annalisa spoke for the first time, hesitantly. I heard voices in the night. In the library. A man I didn't recognize. A foreign accent. But I didn't see his face." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "That confirms it?" He turned toward Hastings. "There is a fourth party in play. Not merely the letters. Not merely the family. Someone else. Someone who came to recover or suppress the truth." Hastings nodded grimly. "So we're not only dealing with a murder. We're chasing a conspiracy." Poirot smiled faintly. "A word I rarely use, Hastings. But perhaps we." Outside, the first drops of rain began to tap against the windows. The storm was no longer approaching. It had arrived. And somewhere in the midst of these storm-swept corridors, Poirot knew, was the key to it all. Not in the past, not in the war, but in something that had remained buried in this house long after the cannons had fallen silent. A truth wrapped in loyalty, silenced by shame. He would find it, even if it meant tearing apart the very foundation of the von Hartfeld legacy. Rain streaked the tall windows of Schloss Welden in erratic silver threads, blurring the view of the forest beyond and pressing the grey light inward. Poirot sat in the salon, a porcelain cup of thick Viennese coffee untouched beside him, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Across from him, Hastings sat in an armchair, legs crossed, reading through the latest copy of the Vienna Gazette, though his eyes strayed more often to Poirot's unmoving expression than to the print. "You're thinking about the visitor," Hastings said finally. Poirot gave a faint nod. "Oui. A man unknown to the family, a voice heard late at night, a conversation held in secret. It is no coincidence, Hastings. Nothing in this case is." He rose and walked slowly to the window, watching the trees sway like uneasy witnesses. This man, whoever he is, was the spark. Leopold's fear, the missing letters, the sudden change in his demeanor. It all begins with that meeting. Hastings leaned forward. "You believe he was blackmailing Leopold?" "Possibly, or warning him, or threatening him. The motive remains unclear, but his presence was no accident." Poirot turned away from the window and glanced toward the clock. It was just past 11. "I must speak with Annalisa again," he said. Hastings looked surprised. "The cousin's daughter?" "Oui. She is quiet, but she sees much, and she has no position to protect, no inheritance to consider. It is often the one furthest from the flame who feels the heat first." They found her in the drawing room, seated with a stack of estate ledgers open before her. The moment she saw Poirot approach, she straightened, her posture stiffening as if bracing for something inevitable. "May I sit, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked gently. She nodded. "You told me yesterday that you heard voices in the library the night before Leopold died. You said one was unfamiliar, foreign. You did not recognize the man." "No," she said. "I only heard him briefly." "And what about your cousin Leopold's tone?" Poirot asked. "Was he angry, frightened, calm?" She hesitated. "Tense. His voice was low, clipped, but not angry. More like he was trying to control something." Poirot nodded slowly. "Was anything said clearly enough to understand?" Annalisa frowned, eyes drifting to the window. "I only remember one thing. The stranger said, 'You're playing with fire,' and Leopold answered, 'It's already burning.'" Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Are you certain?" "Yes." He stood, bowing slightly. "You have been most helpful." As they left the room, Hastings kept pace beside him. What do you make of that? Poirot's voice dropped. It confirms. Leopold was already committed to action. He had already read the letters, already formed conclusions, and it confirms the stranger was trying to dissuade him, which means he knew the danger, perhaps even helped orchestrate it. Hastings looked troubled. So what now? Now, Poirot said, we verify the visitor's arrival. Someone must have seen him. A man cannot come and go from a great house without leaving a trace. They went directly to the servants' wing. Poirot spoke first with the housekeeper, Frau Greta, a round, stone-faced woman with a stiff apron and a distrust of conversation. She swore no guest had arrived unannounced. Poirot moved on to the stable boy, then the cook, and finally the night porter, a young man named Emile with nervous hands and a cough that interrupted nearly every sentence. At first, Emile insisted no one had arrived that night. Poirot asked again, softer this time, with a note of sympathy in his voice. After a pause, Emile relented. There was a car, he whispered. Late, nearly 1 a.m. I didn't see the plates. The fog was heavy. Poirot leaned in. Describe the man. I didn't see his face, Emile said. He kept to the shadows, but he wore a long coat, dark blue, and he walked with a limp, slight but noticeable. He didn't use the main door. He went around to the back library entrance. Herr Leopold was waiting. Poirot's eyes lit faintly. You saw him leave? Yes, an hour later. No one else knew he came. Merci, Emile. You have done well. As they left the servants' wing, Poirot walked slowly, his mind whirring. The limp, he murmured. The coat. The hidden visit. Hastings, I believe we are chasing a ghost from the Baron's past. A fellow soldier, perhaps, or a spy who never stopped spying. Either way, a man not unfamiliar with secrecy. We must look into the Baron's war records. There may be names, one in particular, that will match our shadow visitor. They returned to the study, where Lady Amelia had kept several of her husband's journals and correspondence files. Poirot asked for privacy, and Hastings helped sift through the dense, leather-bound volumes. Hours passed as the rain intensified. Lightning cracked once in the distance, followed by a long, rolling growl of thunder. At last, Poirot paused over a letter dated 1920. It was addressed from Anton von Hartfeld to a colonel in the British Foreign Office. I am troubled, old friend. The matter of the Vienna station remains unresolved. I still believe L. Bergheim acted under pressure, not conviction, but his association with Rothstein has drawn too much attention. The letters must remain sealed. If the truth were known, especially regarding the boy in Trieste, it would destroy more than reputations. It would destroy blood. Poirot reread the paragraph slowly, his lips forming the names silently. L. Bergheim, Rothstein, and the boy in Trieste, he muttered. Hastings leaned closer. Is that the same Rothstein as— Yes, Poirot said quickly. He was tried in absentia during the war, suspected of passing Allied troop movements to the Central Powers, escaped custody, never found. Rumors said he vanished into post-war Vienna under a new name. You think he's the visitor? I think he never left. I think he's been here, in Vienna, for decades, watching, waiting. A sudden knock at the study door interrupted them. Poirot opened it to find Clara, pale, soaked through, her hair clinging to her cheeks. I went into Father's room, she whispered. I found something, behind the armoire. Poirot was already moving, Hastings at his heels. Clara led them upstairs, through the quiet corridor, into the room that had once belonged to Leopold. It was spare, tidy, haunted now by absence. She moved to the armoire and knelt. Behind it, pressed flat between wall and wood panel, was a small velvet pouch. Poirot took it, opened it gently. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, were 5 folded letters, all bearing the same watermark. Wien, Kriegsarchiv. These were meant to be destroyed, Clara said softly. He couldn't bring himself to do it. Poirot scanned the pages quickly. They were written by Baron von Hartfeld in 1917 and 1918, and they named names, collaborators, bribed officers, secret meetings with men presumed loyal to the crown, and at the center of it all, a liaison named Rothstein. The letters did not accuse him alone, but implicated him deeply. Poirot stood very still. "He kept these," he whispered. "He knew someone might come looking for them." "And someone did," Hastings said grimly. Poirot closed the pouch. "We now know the name. We now know the danger. But what we do not yet know," he said, turning toward Clara, "is which member of this family is connected to Rothstein by more than politics. For that is what I now suspect, that the betrayal of the war did not end with the Baron, but passed on." The storm outside had become a furious drumming. Inside, Poirot felt the case narrowing like the neck of a noose. Someone in Schloss Weldon bore a secret so corrosive it had driven them to murder, and now that secret was in Poirot's hands. Thunder rolled overhead, deeper now, as though echoing from some vast underground place, shaking the old bones of Schloss Weldon. Poirot stood motionless at the center of Leopold's room, velvet pouch in hand, eyes fixed on the water-stained wall where the letters had been hidden. Around him, a silence bloomed, as if the very house was holding its breath. Clara sat on the edge of her father's bed, hands clenched in her lap, her gaze distant. Hastings stood by the door, his face tight with concern. Poirot turned at last. "Clara," he said gently, "why did you go looking behind the armoire?" She looked at him, startled, then flushed. "Because Father always said he hid things in plain sight. When I was a child, he used to slip birthday gifts under rugs or behind curtains instead of wrapping them. He said it was a habit from wartime, that if you hide something too cleverly, you'll forget where it is." Poirot smiled faintly. "A philosophy born of necessity, no doubt, and one that has just yielded us the heart of the mystery." He held up the pouch. "These letters, mon Dieu, they are incendiary. They confirm everything Leopold feared, everything that was hinted at in his final note. Rothstein was a traitor, yes, but more than that, he was protected by someone close to the Baron, someone within this family." Clara looked away. Poirot's voice softened. "You must understand, mademoiselle. What we have found, it changes everything. The motive is no longer merely political. It is deeply personal." She swallowed. "Then someone here, someone I know, killed him." Poirot said nothing. There was no comfort in truth. He moved toward the window, watching rain slide down the glass in trembling streams. Hastings came to stand beside him. "So, what's the next step?" Hastings asked. Poirot answered without turning. "Now we return to the others. We lay a trap, not of deception, but of precision. Let us see who flinches when truth is placed before them." They reconvened in the blue salon at Poirot's request. The family filed in one by one, each bearing the marks of mounting strain. Elizabeth was the first to arrive, dressed impeccably as always, her posture sharp and guarded. Stefan followed, shoulders hunched in a damp overcoat. Camilla entered slowly, her eyes hollow but attentive. Colonel Ames came next, his face unreadable, jaw rigid with unspoken tension. Annalise entered last, her nervous glances betraying how out of place she felt among these people. Poirot waited until they were seated, then stepped forward with the velvet pouch in hand. "I have found the remaining Vienna letters," he said simply. The reaction was instantaneous. Elizabeth's chin lifted. Camilla's breath caught audibly. Colonel Ames narrowed his eyes. Stefan blinked once, then looked away. Only Annalisa seemed confused. "I thought they were destroyed," Camilla whispered. "As did the killer," Poirot replied. A beat passed. "You mean someone here?" she asked. "I mean precisely that." He crossed to the fireplace and placed the pouch carefully on the mantel. These letters contain damning revelations, names, operations, betrayals, but among them is something far more dangerous. A direct link between Rothstein and the family von Hartfeld, not only through the Baron, but through one of you. He turned slowly to face them. Someone in this room has spent their life keeping a secret, and that secret, threatened now by what Leopold found, has driven them to eliminate him. The silence was total. Poirot continued, "Allow me to be clear. Leopold was murdered. His death staged as a suicide. Yes, but poorly. The pill bottle was placed too neatly. The chair moved afterward. The study rearranged to suggest calm. But the details betrayed the performance. He did not die by his own hand. He was silenced." Stefan shifted in his chair. "You're very certain of that, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot turned to him. "I am certain, monsieur, because of what was not found. The letters were missing, yes, but the envelope that held them was hidden elsewhere. Why move the letters, but not the envelope? Because the murderer feared taking anything more than necessary. They wanted only the evidence, nothing that could be traced." He looked to Camilla. "And you, madame, you brought him tea that night, did you not?" "I did," she said faintly, "as always. But the cup remained half full, cold, which suggests he never drank it. Either he was already dead when it was brought, or he was interrupted." Colonel Ames interjected. "Do you have any idea what you're accusing us of?" "Non, monsieur. I accuse no one, yet, but I will expose the truth." He walked slowly to the table where a decanter of cognac had been set, poured a measure with deliberate care, then turned back. "I have read all the letters," he said. "One in particular stands apart. It is not addressed to an ally or superior, but to Rothstein himself. In it, the Baron pleads. He writes, 'I protected you for the sake of my daughter. I protected you because I could not see her ruined, but you will not involve the next generation. That I will not allow.'" A stillness passed over the room like a blade. Poirot stepped closer. "There are only 2 daughters." Camilla stiffened. Elizabeth said nothing. "But it is not Elizabeth," Poirot continued. "The Baron had no fondness for her husband. Their estrangement is well known. But the younger daughter—" "I'm not his daughter," Camilla said quickly, her voice rising. "I was his daughter-in-law." "Yes," Poirot said softly, "you are correct, which means the reference is not to his daughter, but to Rothstein's." Gasps. Clara rose to her feet, staring at Poirot as though he'd struck her. He turned to her, voice now grave. "Clara, your father was not who you believed him to be. The Baron took you in, raised you as his granddaughter. But your blood, your origin, is another story." She took a shaky step backward. "No, I don't—" Poirot pressed on, relentless now. "Leopold discovered the truth in the letters, that during the war the Baron's wife, Lady Amelia, was sent to a safe house near Trieste, guarded by Rothstein. She became pregnant. The child—" "No!" Camilla snapped, her voice shaking. "Stop this! You can't—" "Was adopted quietly, hidden from the public, raised here as the Baron's own blood, to preserve the family name. That child was you, Clara." Clara sank slowly into her seat, white as bone. "I'm his daughter?" Poirot nodded, solemnly. "You are the daughter of Rothstein, and that is why Leopold was afraid. Not because of you, but because of what your identity might be used to do. Someone believed that if the truth came out, everything would unravel. Inheritance, loyalty, honor." He turned back to the room. "And someone killed to keep it hidden." Elizabeth rose. "This is a farce." Poirot looked directly at her. Is it, mademoiselle? Then perhaps you can explain why your handwriting matches the note sent to Lady Amelia, the one that said, "Burn them, or suffer." Her lips parted, but no words came. Poirot walked toward her, each step measured. You have lived your entire life under your father's shadow, watched your brother receive praise, your sister rebel, your family fracture, and when you saw Leopold digging into the past, saw that he might give Clara, Rothstein's daughter, a share of your legacy, you panicked. "That's absurd," she snapped. "No," Poirot said gently. "It is not. You didn't kill for political reasons. You killed to protect what you believed was yours." He turned to the others. And when she saw the letters were missing, she sent the threat. She searched Leopold's room afterward, but did not find the pouch. She didn't know Clara had guessed where it might be. The silence was unbearable now. Elizabeth stood motionless, mouth trembling, eyes hollow. Poirot stepped back. The truth is ugly, yes, but justice, it is necessary. It clears the rot from the wound. Rain thundered against the windows. Hastings moved quietly toward the door. "Elizabeth von Hartfeld," he said, voice steady, "you are under suspicion of murder." And still, Elizabeth said nothing. Only Clara spoke, her voice so soft it barely crossed the room. "Was anything ever real in this house?" Poirot turned to her. "You," he said quietly. "You are. And that, mademoiselle, is where the story begins again." Elizabeth stood motionless in the center of the blue salon, her figure stiff and unmoving, the silence around her thickening like fog. Outside, the storm beat against the tall windows in frantic rhythm, a counterpoint to the tension that now saturated every breath in the room. Her face, pale and drained of its usual steel, revealed no defiance, no apology, only a stillness that masked 1,000 calculations unraveling all at once. Poirot did not move toward her. He stood calmly, as though proximity would disrupt the fragile integrity of the moment. Behind him, Clara sat, as if turned to stone, Camilla's hand resting tightly on hers. Colonel Ames remained at the sideboard, arms folded, watching with narrowed eyes. Stefan slouched deeper in his chair, as if wishing to disappear altogether. Anneliese hovered near the wall, hands clenched before her, uncertain whether she was intruding or trapped. "I didn't kill him," Elizabeth said finally, her voice brittle as glass. "I would never have harmed my brother." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet you threatened his silence with a note. You admitted, moments ago, that the letters should have remained hidden. You had motive, you had access, and most importantly, you had fear." Her eyes flicked to Clara, then back again. "I wasn't afraid of the truth," Elizabeth said. "I was afraid of what it would cost this family. Everything our name has stood for, everything the Baron preserved through war, through scandal, it would all be undone by the existence of those letters." "And your brother?" Poirot asked softly. "Was his life a fair price to preserve a name?" She hesitated, her breath catching. "No." "And yet," Poirot continued, "you knew Leopold was becoming unstable, that he was speaking to strangers, seeking legal counsel, asking questions about bloodlines and inheritance." "He was obsessed," she muttered. "He kept saying the future had to be clean, that the poison had to be cut out." Poirot nodded. "Yes, because he believed that to preserve the legacy of the family, he had to tell the truth. You, on the other hand, believed the opposite." He turned slightly, addressing the room. It was not hatred that drove Elizabeth. It was devotion, a misdirected loyalty. She believed herself to be the last guardian of her father's legacy, but it was not hers to guard. It had already been corrupted long before she took up its defense. Elizabeth sank slowly into the nearest chair, her hands trembling in her lap. "I wanted to stop him from making a mistake. I wanted to frighten him into silence. That's all. I didn't kill him." "You're not lying," Poirot said. "Not entirely. I do not believe you administered the poison. You lacked the nerve, but you sent the note, and more importantly—" He turned his gaze on Colonel Ames. "You told someone that Leopold had uncovered the letters." The room froze again. Ames raised his chin. "You're accusing me now?" "I am stating," Poirot replied calmly, "that only two people knew that Leopold was planning to make the letters public, Lady Amelia and Elizabeth. Lady Amelia sent for me. Elizabeth remained silent. But someone else arrived at the house before I did. Someone who met with Leopold in the dead of night. A man with a limp. A man in a dark coat." Camilla stiffened. "You said that man was Rothstein." "I did," Poirot replied, "but now I believe I was mistaken. Rothstein has been dead for 10 years. The man who visited was not Rothstein, but someone who served with him. Someone who knew the content of the letters intimately. Someone who was once implicated in the Vienna operations but escaped official punishment." Hastings stepped forward. "You mean Colonel Ames?" Poirot nodded once. "Oui, he was there. The Baron protected him out of loyalty, and Leopold found out." Ames gave a cold laugh. "You have no proof of that?" "No." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And yet you arrived here a full day before you told the family. You said you were in the city on unrelated matters, and came out of concern when you heard of Leopold's death. But you were already here the night he died. You came through the back, as Emile the porter confirmed. You left an hour later, after warning Leopold, perhaps after threatening him." Ames said nothing. Poirot pressed on. "You didn't intend to kill him. You meant to frighten him, but it failed. So you returned the next morning to retrieve the letters. Only they were already gone. And that, I believe, is when you panicked." Ames exhaled slowly, his composure fraying at the edges. "You're very clever, Poirot, but you have no body, no murder weapon, and no confession." "You are correct," Poirot said softly. "But what I do have is something else." He stepped to the writing desk and drew out a small envelope, one that had been delivered with the morning post just an hour earlier, quietly retrieved before anyone else could see it. "An anonymous tip," Poirot said, holding it aloft. "Typed. No return address. But the words—" He brought a vial. I saw it in his coat. He argued with him for nearly an hour. When he left, Leopold looked terrified. Poirot looked around the room. "It is written by one of the servants, someone afraid to come forward directly, but it confirms what I suspected. Colonel Ames was the last person to see Leopold alive." Ames stared at him, silent. Poirot stepped forward once more. "You were never meant to be part of the Baron's legacy. You were a shadow figure, useful in war, inconvenient in peace. He protected you from disgrace, but he would not protect you from his son." Ames's voice cracked for the first time. "I served with honor." "You served yourself," Poirot replied, "until Leopold uncovered the truth." Camilla stood then, tears forming. "So you did it?" "You killed him?" "I didn't mean to," Ames said quietly. "I tried to reason with him. He wouldn't listen. He kept talking about Clara, about the family name. He said he'd burn everything down." Poirot's voice turned to ice. "And so you chose to do it first?" Ames lowered his head. "I gave him the vial. I told him it was his choice. I thought he'd be too proud to use it. I thought he'd—" "Think again?" Poirot cut in. "You were wrong." He stepped back. "Elizabeth threatened him. Ames gave him the means. But it was Leopold who decided, in that moment, to remove himself rather than see his family torn apart. And that, I believe, is the final cruelty in all this. That a man who wanted truth was driven to silence not by force, but by despair." The room was silent. Outside, the storm began to break, the rain softening into drizzle. Poirot turned to Hastings. "Send for the police. They will find enough to proceed with charges of coercion, obstruction, and unlawful death. Ames said nothing. He simply sat. Poirot turned to Clara, who had not spoken in many minutes. She looked at him now, her face streaked with tears. "What happens now?" she asked. "You will be named as your father's heir," Poirot said gently. "Not because of your blood, but because of your choices. Because you did not hide, you did not silence, you searched for truth." She nodded, lips trembling. "Will it be enough?" Poirot's expression softened. "For now, mademoiselle, it will have to be." The rain had stopped by the time Inspector Hartmann arrived from Vienna, his overcoat still damp with mist, and his eyes marked by the weariness of too many such calls. He entered the blue salon quietly, without fanfare, as Poirot greeted him with a low murmur in French. Hastings stood near the hearth, arms folded, watching the old rhythms resume, the inspection of timelines, the formal statements, the quiet assertion of control by local authorities, now stepping in to process what Poirot had already unraveled. Colonel Ames was led from the room without struggle, his face pale, composed, and resigned, as though some private war had at last come to an end. He did not look at Clara as he passed her. He did not look at anyone. Only Poirot met his eyes briefly, and in that fleeting moment, something passed between them. Not triumph, not condemnation, recognition, that a man who had spent his life veiled in secrets would now face judgment, not for what he'd done during wartime, but for the truths he'd tried to smother long after. Elizabeth remained seated by the window, hands clasped rigidly in her lap, refusing to look at anyone. Her silence now was no longer defensive. It was a shield against the collapse of everything she had upheld. She had not left the room since the confrontation. Poirot had not asked her to. He had known she would not run. Camilla had taken Clara upstairs, saying nothing to the others, walking with the posture of someone both vindicated and hollow. Stefan had vanished, possibly to the wine cellar, muttering something about old ghosts and new fools. Annalisa, forgotten amid the storm, had retreated to her guest room, her presence now a footnote in a story that had never truly been hers to begin with. Inspector Hartmann approached Poirot after concluding his initial statements. "You were right," he said simply. "The fingerprints on the envelope match Colonel Ames. The porter's account lines up. The threat note, Elizabeth's. It's enough to hold them both." Poirot nodded. "And the letters?" "We'll take them into custody, as evidence." "No," Poirot said firmly. "They were never meant for that. Their truths are old, dangerous in the wrong context. Give them to Clara. Let her decide what to do." Hartmann raised an eyebrow. "You trust her with that?" "I do," Poirot said, "because she was not born into these secrets. She found them, and she chose light." Hartmann studied him for a moment, then gave a small, respectful nod and turned away. Poirot walked slowly through the house afterward. The corridors of Schloss Velden, once suffocating with silence, now seemed thinner somehow, emptied of something. The fear, perhaps, or the weight of too many buried things. The portraits on the walls looked less accusatory in the softer light that filtered through the now cleared windows. He stopped briefly before a faded oil painting of the Baron, standing in uniform, eyes sharp, mouth firm. Not a hero, Poirot thought, not truly. Merely a man who had tried to shape a narrative in which his sins would die with him. But truth, like seed, does not die in silence. It waits, and eventually it grows. Poirot found Clara alone in the garden near the edge of the woods, her coat tight around her shoulders, hair still damp. She didn't turn as he approached. "I thought you'd left," she said. "I rarely leave without saying goodbye," Poirot replied. She glanced at him, then looked away again. "They're saying I'll inherit everything, that the estate will go to me. Do you wish for that?" She shook her head. "I don't know. It feels like none of it belongs to me. Not the house, not the letters, not even the name. Poirot came to stand beside her. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "it is not blood that defines legacy. It is choice. The Baron's secrets are no longer yours to keep. But the story that follows, that you may shape. For yourself, for others." She was quiet for a long time. "I loved my father," she said at last. "Even if he wasn't my father by blood. He was kind, distant sometimes, but he always listened. I think he wanted to tell me, but didn't know how." "He protected you in the only way he knew," Poirot said. "But in the end, it was you who protected him." She turned to face him. "I feel lost," she whispered, "like I don't know where I come from, or where I'm supposed to go." Poirot smiled softly. "That is not uncommon, but you are young and strong, and no longer tied to lies. You may choose who you become." Clara nodded, eyes wet. Poirot reached into his coat and retrieved the velvet pouch, now sealed with string and bearing her name in his own hand. "You must decide," he said. "Destroy them if you wish, publish them, lock them away again, but decide not in fear, decide in light." She took the pouch with trembling fingers, holding it to her chest. "I'll think," she whispered. Poirot bowed slightly. "That is all I ask." They walked back together in silence, the wind gentler now, the trees still but listening. At the front of the estate, Hastings waited with their bags. The car was packed, the engine already humming. "Well," he said, glancing around the quiet estate, "I dare say this one will haunt the place for a while." Poirot gave a small nod. "Oui, but perhaps in time it will heal." They stepped into the car, and as it pulled away down the gravel drive, Poirot looked back once, just once, at the looming silhouette of Schloss Weldon, now receding into the trees. Its secrets had been dragged into the open. Not all had been punished, not all had confessed, but the spell had broken, and somewhere inside, a young woman now held the power to decide what kind of future could be built atop the ruins of carefully crafted lies. Hastings turned to him. "You were right, you know, about the letters, about Leopold." Poirot nodded, staring out the window. "Yes, mon ami, but being right is never the goal, only truth, and sometimes truth is a very quiet thing." The road curved gently ahead. The sun had begun to break through the clouds. Poirot leaned back in his seat, eyes closed, hands resting lightly over his cane. The case of the Vienna letters was done, but memory, like justice, rarely forgets. The journey back to Vienna passed in quiet contemplation, the roads glistening from recent rain, the hills of the countryside cloaked in early autumn mist. Hastings drove with his usual concentration, half proud, half nervous under the weight of having Poirot as his passenger, but Poirot hardly noticed the scenery or the turns. His mind, though calm, still traced the outline of the case as one traces the edges of a faded photograph, not to question its resolution, but to understand the meaning behind each silent corner. He thought of Clara, of how she had stood not as a witness, but as the crossroads, the bearer of a hidden past, now tasked with preserving or dismantling the legacy of a family that had spent generations building its own illusion. There was no doubt in Poirot's mind she would choose wisely, but even so, it was no small burden. He had left her with truth, not comfort. Hastings glanced sideways. "You're uncharacteristically silent," he said. Poirot opened his eyes. "Am I?" "Yes," Hastings replied. "Usually you'd be correcting my driving by now, or making some cryptic remark about symmetry and betrayal." Poirot gave the faintest smile. "And do you miss it, mon ami? The scolding?" "I wouldn't say miss exactly, but it's oddly reassuring." Poirot chuckled softly. "Eh bien, then I shall return to form. Your last turn was taken with all the grace of a cow on cobblestone." Hastings laughed, the tension easing. "There he is." They crossed into Vienna just after 3. The streets were bustling again, the rain having driven people inside for most of the morning. And now pedestrians re-emerged with umbrellas tucked under arms and faces lifted to a sky beginning to brighten. Poirot directed Hastings not to his usual hotel, but to a modest address near the university quarter. "A brief detour," he said. "There is one matter remaining, a loose thread I must examine." Hastings raised a brow. "I thought the case was closed." Poirot nodded. "It is. But a story rarely ends with the truth alone. There are always shadows left behind." The car pulled to a stop before a narrow townhouse, its facade lined with ivy, its windows shuttered with green-painted wood. Poirot stepped out, adjusted his cuffs, and climbed the short stair. He knocked twice. An old woman answered, her back bent, hair swept into a silver knot. "Yes?" "Forgive the interruption, madame," Poirot said with warmth. "I come with a question regarding someone who once lived here, a man named Rothstein." At the name, her eyes narrowed slightly. "You're not the first to ask." "No?" "He had many visitors over the years, all different, all looking for something." Poirot inclined his head. "And did they find it?" She hesitated. "He left no family, no forwarding address, but I was the one who cleaned his rooms after he passed." Poirot's voice lowered. "Did he leave behind anything? Letters? Documents?" She opened the door wider, gesturing toward the stairwell. "One box. I didn't throw it away. It didn't seem like rubbish." Inside, the home smelled faintly of camphor and lavender. Poirot climbed the stairs slowly, feeling the age of the place settle around him like a shawl. The landlady led him to a narrow storage closet. From within, she pulled out a wooden box no larger than a shoebox, its lid tied with twine. Poirot thanked her, offered a coin she refused, and returned to the car with the box under one arm. Hastings looked over. "What is it?" "Closure," Poirot said simply. Back in the hotel, Poirot untied the box and laid its contents on the small writing desk. Inside were old photos, grainy, faded, a group of soldiers posing in uniform, a young woman standing in a garden, her face just visible in profile. There were letters too, but written in German and French, many unsigned. Some were short, cryptic, others rambling and wounded, haunted by regret. But one envelope, folded inside the cover of a tattered book of poetry, was addressed plainly in English, "To the child who was never told." Poirot opened it. "I do not know your name. I do not know if you are a boy or a girl, or if you ever heard of me. But if you are reading this, then the past has finally reached you. I never asked for forgiveness. I would not know what to do with it. But I hope, at least, that you are alive, that you are well, that you are not living in the shadow I cast. In war, we all betray something. Country, comrades, conscience. I betrayed more than most. I betrayed love. I betrayed your mother. But I never stopped thinking of you. If you choose to burn this letter, I understand. But if you choose to keep it, let it be not as a burden, but as a line drawn behind you. You owe nothing to me, and everything to yourself. Be free." Poirot read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and replaced it in the envelope. Later that evening, he penned a short note to Clara. "Ma chère mademoiselle, in Vienna today, I found something that belongs to you, not by law, nor by name, but by the same thread of truth that led us here. Enclosed, a final letter from Rothstein. You must decide whether to open it, but I believe you will know what to do. Avec toute ma considération, Hercule Poirot." He sent it with the Morning Post. That night, Poirot sat at the window of his hotel, overlooking the lights of the city, the quiet hum of the streetcars, the flicker of lanterns in the distance. Vienna, like all cities with ghosts, felt unchanged by the uncovering of any single truth. It had seen too many revolutions, too many betrayals, too many reconciliations. But one truth, small and singular, had emerged. A girl had found her name. A legacy had been realigned. A lie passed from father to son to daughter had finally broken. Hastings appeared with 2 cups of tea and set one down without a word. Poirot took it, smiling faintly. "There are endings," Hastings said at last. "And then there are—" "What? Echoes?" "Oui," Poirot replied. "Ripples. Do you think she'll read the letter?" "I think," Poirot said, "that she already has, even before it arrived." They sat in silence for a while, as the sounds of Vienna faded into the hush of evening. The case of the Vienna letters had not ended with a dramatic arrest or a last-minute confession in a crowded room. It had ended here, in a quiet room above a quiet street, with a letter in a stranger's hand, and the soft understanding that sometimes justice is not about punishment, but about release. Poirot sipped his tea. One more case closed. One more story made whole. And in the distance, beyond the city lights, a future had begun to write itself. The following spring, Poirot returned to Vienna, not by summons, nor on the heels of a mystery, but at the invitation of Clara Hartfeld. The letter had arrived in his London flat, modest, precise, and written in a hand that had grown steadier. She had written simply, "Monsieur Poirot, the renovations at Schloss Weldon are nearly complete. The archives have been turned into a reading room. I have decided not to destroy the letters. They will be kept, not as weapons, but as warnings. If you are ever in Vienna again, I would be honored to show you what remains and what has begun anew. Clara." And so he came, not with Hastings this time, but alone, as he often was when the work was finished, and only the world remained to walk through. Schloss Weldon had changed. The facade was still grand, but where once it had seemed to brood, now it stood softened, vines trimmed, windows opened, curtains drawn wide to the light. Inside, the blue salon had been converted into a quiet library, its shelves lined with the family's collection, not sealed behind glass, but accessible. Clara met him in the entrance hall, dressed in pale blue, her hair pinned in a simple twist. She looked older, but not aged, grounded. Her grief had not disappeared, but it had settled into her in a way that gave her gravity rather than weight. "You kept your promise," she said as they embraced. Poirot smiled. "And you kept the house." She led him through the corridor and into the former archives, now bathed in sunlight through a narrow skylight. The walls had been painted cream. The stone shelves had been replaced with clean oak bookcases. In one glass case, the velvet pouch lay unopened, alongside a note in Clara's own hand. "These letters are not erased. They are remembered. Their truths are painful, but silence no longer protects us. May they never be needed again." Poirot stood before the display for a long moment. "Have you read them again?" he asked softly. She nodded. "More than once. I know them now for what they are. Not only confessions, they're warnings. They remind me how easy it is to believe that a lie will shelter you longer than truth." Poirot turned to her. "And what of the letter I sent? The one from Rothstein?" She hesitated. Then, "I read it. I kept it. I haven't decided what to do with it yet." He gave a slight bow. "You will know when it is time." They walked the grounds afterward, past budding trees and a fountain that had been restored to working order. The air smelled of wet grass and soft blossoms. Clara paused near the old wrought-iron bench beneath the cypress trees. "You said once that memory, like justice, rarely forgets," she said. "I think I'm beginning to understand what you meant." Poirot nodded. "It is not the forgetting that frees us. It is the choosing, what to carry and what to leave behind." They sat for a time in the quiet. No more questions to ask. No more mysteries to unspool. Before he left, Clara handed him a sealed envelope. "It's not from Rothstein," she said. "It's from me. A letter for the records, in case anyone asks one day what happened here. I thought perhaps you should keep it." Poirot accepted it without opening it, tucking it into his coat. "I will ensure it is preserved." As the car carried him away from Schloss Weldon, Poirot looked back once, just once. The trees swayed gently, the sky cleared, and the house did not feel haunted anymore. Back in London, he placed Clara's letter in a small locked drawer, beside the case notes, the photographs, and the personal memories he never shared. The Vienna letters had not changed the world. They had not unmade nations or toppled legacies, but they had changed one woman's life, and through her, a lineage poisoned by secrecy had been offered a chance to grow clean. And that, Hercule Poirot thought as he straightened the edges of his desk, was more than enough. For in the end, it is not always the villain who shatters us, nor the crime that defines us. It is the truth that saves us. And for those willing to face it, truth is never too late.